This call is now being recorded.
Hello.
Wow. Volume adjust. Okay, now say something. See if it was too loud before.
Hello.
Say something. Now speak normally so I can see if it's too loud.
Hello.
Okay, that's good. So whenever you record someone, they know that you're recording. Yeah? Because it told me.
For some reason, my phone doesn't always record. I had this great discussion with a Dawa guy from England, and I even got the guy to even say, wow, you're very convincing. You convinced me to take your shahada or something like that. And I checked it only recorded one side. That means it only recorded my voice and not his. And it would have been such a good...
No.
Yes, it was so good. I went on all these Islamic sites and I was saying, who wants to debate a Jew? And I started the whole conversation. This guy, I think he was originally Pakistani, and he confronts people in the street in England. You know how they record it? Like similar to a Deen show, but on the street. First of all, he didn't even know you could convert to Jew.
The Deen show.
The Deen show. Yeah, and Mr. Deen is not the sharpest knife in the drawer.
No.
You know, people tolerate his show, but he sounds like a sweet guy. He just doesn't seem like a debater, you know what I mean? He just seems like someone who interviews. You could always pull out that I'm not an imam card, so don't ask me. The Deen show. I'm not an expert in the Quran, but I'm an expert in thought and logic. And I could at least get them to acknowledge that if they had to do it all again in terms of choosing Islam, assuming they weren't born Muslim, I could get them to say they should have chosen Judaism instead, being that it's just as ethical. Now, I mean, I believe Judaism is more ethical than Islam. So I say if the religion is just as ethical, but it's older, then by definition, all things being the same, you're forced to go with what's older. They don't have a response to that because I told them that the only thing that Judaism really differs in Islam with is not ethics, but the narrative and theology. But these things do not determine how ethical someone will be. If the laws are pushing an ethical ideal, all things being the same, you have to go with the older religion, right? Especially like if yours claims to be an offshoot of that religion or claims that that religion in some way corrupted itself. And they don't have an answer to that. But anyways, I think that's the best way to win these guys over, not knowing the Quran. Anyone just walking in and trying to find inconsistencies in the Quran, they'll do that with the Tanakh all day long too. If you get them to admit that our only differences are theological, or what God considers fit or not fit, whether Muhammad is a prophet or not, I mean, these things ultimately don't make the world any better or any worse. Right. I even argue that monotheism doesn't necessarily make you an ethical person. I mean, you could be a full... Of course not. You could be a full polytheist and be fully ethical, and you could be fully monotheistic and be unethical. So people fail to make these distinctions. They think like, oh, well, he's an idolater, so by definition, he can be a good man.
Most of the barbaric acts that have happened in more recent history were from regimes, but less so from one person onto another on an individual level. But in history, most of the idolatrous cultures, like people had all kinds of ridiculous, superstitious beliefs that led them to do crazy things that were unethical as a result of their beliefs to happen to be idolaters. Mm-hmm. The mere fact that someone thinks that there's multiple supernatural beings doesn't in and of itself require that they will do unethical things. It depends on what they think the implications of the will of those is. Mm-hmm. As to whether or not they would do unethical or ethical actions.
I think people, especially in the counter-missionary world, write Christians off on the basis that they're idolaters and in some way classify them as irredeemable on that basis and completely forget on how kind and decent these individuals are. Other Torah principles, which are ultimately, in our eyes, more important. Monotheism in general is the ultimate hook. If we understand Hukim as something that we cannot comprehend why it's necessary, it's something that we have to keep nonetheless. I think that Jews unconsciously know these ideas that I'm sharing right now, and this is why they don't feel they have to proselytize. Now, I've always thought that the main reason Jews don't want to proselytize is because they themselves aren't happy being Jewish. Even in this case, if they unconsciously acknowledge that Christians are good without being Jewish, maybe they realize that if you would make a good Christian into like an average Jew, because they usually say bad Jew, they would think
the
that
battle.
it's better to be a good Gentile than a bad Jew. That's typically their argument.
You mean as far as like the implications it could have? How do you say the name of the Jewish people in the world? Is that what...
For whatever reason, but then they're probably thinking that if they would convert a Gentile to Judaism, you'd be making a good Gentile into an average Jew, which by definition is not good either. Because maybe in the back of their mind, they're thinking that being Jewish is something they just have to tolerate because in their mind they can't escape it, but it's not something they want to toss on somebody else.
Well, because they don't see any particular value in being Jewish to begin with, other than something that has simply caused them hardship throughout their history.
Right.
I do think that there's probably some element of that in the overall lack of enthusiasm for advocating for conversion to Judaism. I mean, why would you advocate something that you don't so much appreciate yourself? And I've definitely experienced that in the religious world as well, more so from rabbis than from regular religious Jews. I really think that the principal cause for the indifference towards conversion among most Jews, on the one hand, I think you said to some degree, how can you feel any sort of passion for reaching out to people to join your cause when you don't really even feel that you have a cause worthy of reaching people out to join? But more than that, I think the principal cause for this sort of indifference is actually not anything on the part of Jewish belief or perspective in and of itself. I don't think it's so much from what Jews today would say that it's a result of. I think it's more a result of simply conditioning of 2,000 years of actually being forbidden from accepting converts, both under Christian domination and in the Muslim world. Basically, the entire Jewish world, aside from small communities in India, were under Christianity and Islam for nearly 2,000 years. And it wasn't like Christianity today in the United States. It was harsh, highly politicized Christianity, which obviously doesn't represent the teachings of Jesus, but that's the Christianity that it was. And Jews were not allowed to accept converts. I'm sure, in reading their religious texts, educated Jews knew they accepted converts. But what effect does that have, or value does that have, when practically speaking, you can't do anything with it? And in the cases that it's known that they did accept converts, there were often dire consequences as a result. The entire community suffered. I'm not saying that justifies.
I think that's.
I'm also saying this is one aspect, but I think this is the principal underlying aspect, and then the other causes I think are built upon that underlying cause. I think that sort of lays the foundation for these other factors.
I think that Judaism nowadays, and even Orthodox Judaism, is so disconnected to how Jews behaved and what they weren't allowed to do in the last 1,000 years. For some reason, I think every generation wants to forget all the previous generations, and that's how Judaism ultimately functions. I don't think the average Jew walks around even thinking about this. I think that the main reason that Jews don't proselytize or don't care to proselytize are for the same reason that Greek Orthodox Christians or Armenian Christians or Catholics really don't care to proselytize either. Because they politicize their religion. In other words, they've tied it into a geographical location. Now, mind you, there is clearly a significance of the land of Israel, or to the land of Israel in our religion, but not in the way that it's understood nowadays. Not if you're viewing Israel like the French and the Irish view their countries. In other words, every Roman Catholic, every Armenian or Greek Christian feels that those outside of their fold, those not holding their passport in some way, are less important to the religion. And one, it causes them to look down on them, and two, it causes individuals to not even want to enter to begin with. In other words, they've lost their whole reason for existing. Ultimately.
I completely agree with that, but this would not be the case were it not that those Jews who do have a passion for their faith, and such Jews do exist, Jews by birth like that do exist, even though they're not the majority. I think that would be less the case if Jews who did have such a passion would be more pro-converts and see the value in seeking out converts. And I think that that's not the case due predominantly to the conditioning of 2,000 years of being under regimes that actually forbade them from it. So that when you have a secular Jew, as you're describing, who simply is not even think about it because like they don't value the Jewish faith, because really the Jewish faith is not their faith. They're just Jewish by happenstance, ethnically, not in value. But even though that would be the cause, if they were to encounter among religious Jews a different kind of ideology that does promote the underlying values of the historical Jewish faith, then I think the whole paradigm would be different. The whole situation would be different. In other words, I think that both of these factors, both the secular aspect, we just don't even think about it because they don't really value the religion. They've totally lost the connection to it. And the historical cause, which is, I think, the main cause in the religious community. I think both of these together sort of play on each other.
All right. So like most Quentin Tarantino movies that start in the middle or towards the end, and then the movie begins, now we're going to begin our interview with Rabbi Yosef Eliyah, live from Jerusalem. Welcome, Yosef.
Thank you, Rabbi Meza.
So, you're a very known individual in the religious YouTube world, and I don't think that you have one video completely telling your story, or if you do, there's so much that has happened, even in the last year, that video would have to be updated, or even in the last 5 years or 10 years. Or I think that the audience would really get a kick hearing about you and what you've been through, and ultimately your future goals, how we met, and how I completely changed your life.
And I've been able to find that spark in another man's eye since I laid my eyes on Rabbi Meza.
There we go. Well, I mean, I tend to have that effect on people.
Okay. Loosening up the atmosphere. I'm sorry. Okay. I've had a lot of events that I've gone through, and I've documented some of it. I've not documented all of it. And usually what I do document in any particular video, it doesn't do much justice and is not very thorough regarding whatever it was that I was going through. For example, I have one of my first videos was why I became Jewish. I think it was called Christian Converts to Judaism. And I mainly focus on theological ideas in that video, and I don't really discuss my own personal experiences in it.
Tell us a little bit about your early days. What did you do before becoming Jewish? What was your actual name? Where are you from? I think inquiring minds want to know the person behind Yosef Eliyah.
Well, my name was Andrew Gallagher Bridges. That's not a secret. And I grew up in relatively rural northern Louisiana.
Being that you're known for speaking on religious topics, share with us your religious upbringing, what drew you to God, and how that eventually led you to Judaism.
I don't think that we all have exactly the same predispositions, and I think most relatively educated people would agree with that. We don't all have the same predispositions. And my mom has told me that at a very, very young age, I don't remember this specifically, it's one thing I happen to not remember, she says that when I was, not long after I was able to walk, I was like, let's say a toddler. She came in to the house from outside and I trotted in. I fell on my back and I looked up and said, "Let the angels come and take me away." It seems like I probably have some sort of predisposition to religious type sentiment and feelings. And as my life has gone on, I think I've taken a much more rationalist approach, but my predisposition has been quote unquote spiritual. But I was definitely raised with traditional values, conservative values, but also with a strong appreciation and emphasis on questioning and research. My mom always encouraged me to question things and to think independently. And she never, ever...
Your dad, and where was he during all this?
I have a biological father, and I have a one father parent. When my parents divorced when I was between like 9 months and a year old, something like that. My mom remarried.
Your dad was a rock
maybe
star.
like within a year.
Was your dad a rock star or something?
No, like he's sort of a local music star, or more so in the 80s than now. Yeah, he had a record at one time, but he probably could have done more with that than he did. That's each person has their own life and makes their own choices. Mm-hmm. I'm very grateful for my stepdad, and I remember when I was 5 years old in kindergarten, there was a little girl who came in to our class around Christmas time. We were practicing for a Christmas recital thing, and she brought in a little Hanukkah menorah and taught us the song "Dreidel, Dreidel, Dreidel." I made it out of clay, and for whatever reason, I remember that song from way back then. So that's my earliest memory of anything Jewish. Then after that, I would say my other awarenesses of Jewishness is from Sunday school with my grandmother. She was a Sunday school teacher, and I remember seeing pictures like the Israelites and stuff, but I didn't think much of it. I didn't get much into Judaism until I started reading the Bible pretty seriously at the age of, well, it was 6th grade, so I was 11. And I read straight through until I'd say about halfway through the book of Numbers, and then it got kind of daunting. And then I started trying to read the New Testament, but something, I don't know what it was exactly, but something kept me from reading as much as I was for that whole period. And then I picked it up again around the age of, I was 14. So at the age of 14, I started reading the New Testament straight through. And it was really at the age of 14 that I started really getting deep in the Bible. But that was on the basis or with the background of having already read through most of the Torah, albeit through a Christian translation, but regardless of what some people would say, I would say that was Christian translations are accurate enough to lay a significant and influential foundation for me.
I mean, sometimes they're more accurate.
Go ahead.
How sometimes they're even more accurate.
Sometimes they're even more accurate.
I mean, nowadays, a lot of these Jewish publications, they retranslate.
They're based more on Rashi, which is based on Midrash.
Correct. They'll retranslate a whole pasuk based on Rashi's understanding of what it should be saying than what it actually says. And most people don't know this, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, regardless of the whole, obviously, Christian translations aren't perfect, and there's certainly some places that are questionable. But in general, Christian translations of the Hebrew Bible are not problematic for the most part as a translation. And what happened was we were going on a trip. I was on a youth group trip with a church to Coker Creek retreat in East Tennessee. It was really cool. But on this long road trip going there, I started reading the Gospels. And then coming back, I continued reading. And then once I got home, I kept reading all the New Testament. And I read through it slowly and studiously, making notes at least 7 times. It started at the age of 14.
Uh-huh.
I was very isolated. Not because I wanted to be, but that's the way it was. My interests were different than most kids growing up, and I was just very, very isolated. My siblings didn't really click with me, and I only had 2 siblings in the home that I grew up in. And we didn't live in a big city, nor did we have a lot of neighbors. So I was always I wasn't a loner exactly, not by choice, but I was often alone.
If you ask the Makubo, that's that Pintele Yid inside there separating you from the Goyish world. In other words, you always felt like you were a cat in a room of dogs because you were a Jew, and you were a Jew returning back into the fold.
I don't know why that would be anything special with me and not with my brother or sister, because we have the same mother, and same question with my mom. So there's certain good.
Well, this is based on reincarnation. In other words, your neshama is a unity.
In other words, it's completely irrational and illogical, and you have nothing that can base it on other than pure speculation, according to whatever.
I mean, that goes for the vast majority of what the Kubalim teach. We're going.
It isn't like really a full soul, because it's a lost soul. It's an extra small fragment. It's like an inferior spark.
Like your other friend said, that you're a quasi-implanted tooth.
Yeah.
And if you're listening, you know who you are, you jerk. Yeah.
What you're talking about is a comment that Bowen wrote. How did he say that? But that's not what I was referring to. I was referring to actually in reference to a spark. Bowen didn't say something about a spark. He said, and I hope you include this, because he wrote publicly about us. I'm sure it's still on one of my videos where he left that comment, if I left it there. I used the tendency to delete comments that I thought would make hostile discussions arise, whether they were posted by Jews or Muslims or Christians or whoever. But anyway, he basically said that I'm like a quasi-implant, a partially attached implant or something like that.
I'm a partially attached implant.
Yeah, so I started reading through the New Testament pretty in-depth at the age of 14. And from 14 on, it continued that way. But all this time, it was based on everything I read in the New Testament. I had in mind concepts that I was introduced to through a Christian translation of the Torah, the Law of Moses, that I had read when I was 11. I remember vividly reading when I was 11 and noticing how it says, such and such law is to be kept in all your generations and all your dwelling places as an everlasting covenant. And it says this again and again and again, as an everlasting law, as an everlasting covenant. And this was without any exposure to Jewish people or to any missionaries. It was without any sort of bias on my part. I was completely engrossed in a Christian growth. I was completely enveloped in a Christian atmosphere, in a Christian environment. I just happened to read what it said in a Christian translation. So from the age of 14 and on, I was constantly trying to figure out how does all this information that I'm reading in the New Testament work with what I learned in the Law of Moses. And I found out that the problem is, this is more retroactively. The problem was that I read the quote-unquote Old Testament before I read the New Testament. If you are involved in normative Christianity, the normative practice is that you are encouraged, you're told, to study the New Testament first. First you become familiar with the New Testament, and then you go to the Old Testament. But of course what you're doing there is you're doing everything backwards, and you're approaching the entire Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, so-called, through the glasses of the lenses that you acquired in the New Testament. And of course, you're even understanding the New Testament with the lenses of modern-day Christianity. So it's double filters on you. And I imagine that would be extra hard to overcome cognitive dissonance by that point. But thankfully, I bypassed that by my rebellious, ignorant 11-year-old reading of the Torah. And that's because my parents weren't so extremely devout. They have principles, and they taught us faith in God, but they weren't going to church so obsessively that it was dictating every part of our thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't have anyone to tell me, oh, you should be reading this and not that. My mom was just happy that we're reading.
something Southern mom should be proud of, that her children are literate.
I'm proud of my mom.
Can you remember right when you began to doubt what your pastors, what your New Testament was telling you?
When it happened from absolutely no doubt to like everything crashing down within a matter of days. So what happened was, I think I said before, from the age of 14 and on, I was reading the New Testament, studying more and more. And all this time, I don't know exactly where I got from, but I had sort of this concept of logic that whatever I'm reading, like, it should make sense. It should be consistent with itself, right? So that meant that I had to harmonize what I'm reading and learning in the New Testament with everything I had learned in the Torah about these laws being eternal. So from the outset, I was basically on my way to Messianic Judaism. I know people don't like that to be called Judaism, but that's what they call themselves. So I was, from an early age, on that path without even knowing it. And I made a lot of effort to harmonize problematic Christian passages in the New Testament with teachings in the Torah. And I think for the most part it works, for the most part. Although I would say that you sort of have to make a lot of interpretive go-arounds. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm at a loss here for figures of speech. Yeah.
Christian gymnastics.
Yeah. So although I would say that you do need to make use of some sort of hermeneutic gymnastics in order to harmonize everything, but I do think that a lot of it, even without the gymnastics of logic, I think a lot of it would harmonize, and certainly more so than trying to harmonize a lot of Kabbalistic literature with the Torah. If you can harmonize Kabbalistic literature with the Torah, then what's the problem with the New Testament? Like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. That's the only reason that people take an issue with that is just because of the way they were raised and their emotional investment in or against one religion or another. But anyway, and I'm not saying that advocating the New Testament, of course. But what happened was, I was certain that the New Testament could be completely harmonized with the Torah, so I didn't doubt it. Any problematic passage I figured was an issue of translation, historical context. And at the age of 16, I started trying to learn Hebrew. At the age of 14, I started trying to learn Greek. And I spent some time trying to learn Greek, but within a matter of months, I came to the conclusion that it makes more sense that I should first learn Hebrew. Because even if I learn Greek and am able to understand the New Testament through the Greek manuscripts, even if I'm able to understand it through the Greek manuscripts, I still need to understand it in light of the supposed foundation, which is the Hebrew Bible. So Hebrew first, and then later Greek was my thought, and that's what I did. So at the age of 15, I started learning Hebrew. I came across certain passages regarding the establishment of the Sanhedrin in the Torah and in the Tanakh, again at an early age. And that happened at the age of 17. And even 16, but I was certainly convinced by 17, the age of 17, in Rabbinic Judaism. So basically, I had embraced the idea of an oral law before I had overcome Christianity or like Christian theology. I even still believed in the deity of Jesus. Like I didn't even have the phase where like I let go of the divinity of Jesus, and then I sort of let go of the messiahship or anything like that. Like I held on to the divinity of Jesus up to the end. What happened was I got a hold of some books by this guy, I forget his name, Varun something, in Ra'anana in Israel. The Netzarim.co. I don't know if they still have a website. But he tries to take a rationalist approach to the New Testament and claims that he's an Orthodox convert. I'm not going to say whether he was or wasn't, because I honestly don't know. But he doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, and he doesn't believe that the New Testament has authority equal to or above the Torah or Talmudic edicts. But aside from all that, I bought his literature. Basically, he was supposed to guide me through what I was going to do to try to formally convert while maintaining some sort of belief in Jesus. But I read his books, and I was astonished. I slept entire nights, the duration of about a week, reading 2 or 3 of his books. I couldn't believe, and I researched online to try to verify some of the things I was reading, and it made everything collapse because I realized that he really laid it. I don't know what he's doing, but he wants people to continue to believe in Jesus in a more academic way while converting to Judaism. Yet he gives them these books that can destroy the veracity of the New Testament altogether. He totally destroyed the trustworthiness of the New Testament completely in my eyes. And I remember sending him an email saying, I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I remember sending him an email saying, I don't see how we can even continue to believe in the New Testament if it's so shaky. I mean, I might as well believe in anything. And why should I make something that's so doubtful be something that can cause such a strife or difficulty in the interaction with the Jewish community? What I did at that point was I decided, and I told him this as well, I decided that, I don't have all the answers yet for all the supposed prophecies and everything. I have a lot of questions. So one thing I did know was that the New Testament was not nearly as trustworthy as I thought it was before. And I knew there were textual variants. I knew that for years. I went through the King James Version only phase at the 16. As a quasi-messianic King James Version only, I was aware that there were textual variants, but he took it to a whole different level. So it's completely, I didn't see the logic behind it to maintain such conviction of something, and then at the same time to admit that it stands on such shaky ground. And that, together with the idea or the concept which I had already convinced myself of, that one's salvation, according to the Torah, doesn't depend on awareness of any particular individual as to whether or not he's the Messiah. I didn't believe that. So I was like, why am I doing this? But I was very scared, though, at that moment. Those were the 2 scariest weeks of my life regarding eternity, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I just suddenly realized, within a matter of days, unexpectedly realized that I know almost nothing. I mean, theologically. We're not talking about ethics here. We're talking about theology and historical beliefs. So that's what happened. And that's when I contacted first I contacted Chabad rabbi in Dallas.
How did you gave me
Well, I had started developing into a sort of Messianic Jew / Messianic Gentile from the age of 14, basically. So that didn't happen overnight, and they had already more or less adjusted to that. So it wasn't like I just one day said, well, I'm going to be Jewish, and they had no clue. I mean, I started learning Hebrew when I was 15. They saw Hebrew papers in my bedroom, and I memorized Psalm 117, the shortest chapter in the Bible. I memorized it in Hebrew and went and recited it in front of them. And I remember their face when I did that. I don't think they expected that. And I didn't realize how odd that would have been at the time, because I was just me, But thinking back on it, that'd be kind of odd, if your little kid goes into your living room and just recites off a whole chapter of the Bible in Hebrew, and you didn't even send them to Hebrew lessons. It's hilarious. You can learn anything online now if you really want to. It's amazing. But I can't imagine what they were thinking. He cracks me up. Yeah, so they had gotten adjusted to that. And the biggest difficulty for my mom, I think, was the feeling that I sort of gave her the feeling that I believe in a God different from her. I remember one time she told me, like, she didn't yell at me or anything, but she was like, we worship, it hurts my heart to think about it now. Because really I had said or done something that, I was doing something that was giving her the impression that, like, we have different gods. So I remember one day she was saying, like, we worship the same God, Gali. She called me Gali. And it's so sad. But no, I agree with her. I think it's because I was talking about how Christianity is so influenced from paganism and stuff that's what gave her that impression.
Right, in
We're
terms
talking
of
about theology and religious
dogma,
rituals.
ethics.
Right. I mean, I agree with you completely that ethics are the most important thing, but at the same time, an act can be deemed ethical or unethical dependent upon certain beliefs regarding history even. And if those beliefs regarding history are mistaken, it can lead to unintentionally unethical acts. Like, if you think that, and it doesn't have to be history, ancient history, it could be recent history. If you think, for example, that someone stole a bunch of people's land and then just like kicked them out and did a great injustice to them, then you can think you're doing something righteous, something very ethical, when in fact you may be on the unethical side due to your ignorance of history. So I think the history is important and impacts ethics. Like, I think they're distinct, but they're interrelated. Acknowledgement of historical facts and ethical soundness together with ethics. Mm-hmm. Not synonymous, but interrelated.